David Cronenberg. Hello, thank you. Let's have a seat. My name is Jose Teodoro. I'm a Canadian film critic and playwright. I have the great honor this evening of interrogating the man responsible for what you just beheld, which I often think of as simultaneously like the smartest and most disgusting movie I've ever seen. It's I think it's extraordinary in that particular way, but it's a film about transformation. And so I thought an interesting place for us to start would be to talk about the transformation that your career underwent in the 10 years previous, because it's only 10 years between your first feature film, or your first commercial release feature film, and this. And in that time, you went from making these low-budget, very controversial films in Canada to making a film distributed by a major studio, an adaptation of Stephen King. Can you talk a bit about the context in which you came to make The Fly?
Yeah. I was approached by Mel Brooks, who is a comedian and famous for directing very funny films, also kind of sometimes disgusting, but in a funny way, and like Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein and so on. But he had also produced Elephant Man for David Lynch, and as a producer, he was interested in doing edgy films, and was planning to do a remake of a very old horror film from the 1950s called The Fly, which was based on a short story that had appeared, I think, in either Playboy or Esquire. I can't remember, but I remember. So. He had a script, and he got in touch with me, and I said the script has. I'd never done a remake. I'd never thought of doing a remake before, but the script, which I honestly did not think was very good in terms of the dialogue and the characters, but the rethinking of the transformation of The Fly in terms of DNA and computers, which of course did not exist when the short story was written, that intrigued me, and I thought that aspect was good. And I said, if you let me rewrite the whole thing, I might do it, you know. And they were very happy to have me do that. So I rewrote it. There's not one. There are two credits for writing, and they're both legitimate, but there's not one line of dialogue that was from the original script, and many things changed. But certain things, just the science of the transformation, was in this rethinking of The Fly, and I found it was very hard to resist doing it, even though I hadn't up to that point, thought of doing a remake of anything.
Well, if we think about the George Langeland story and the original film version and the screenplay that you had by Charles Edward Pogue, I mean, how much of that actually was retained by the time that you went to camera? Besides the dialogue, I mean, how much of the narrative was actually still intact?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a lot. It was just the concepts, the conceptual stuff of the mixing of DNA, which was not in the Langeland story. It was much more of a kind of a fantasy rather than a more kind of hard science fantasy. And so it's quite different from the. You wouldn't recognize it. I think I wouldn't have made that original script.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things.
And yet. I couldn't have made the movie, though, without that script, so I thought it was legitimate that we both got the writing, we were both credited with writing the movie.
Well, one of the elements that is in the original story that seems very appropriate for your kind of work is the fact that, unlike the prototype of the mad scientist that we see in Frankenstein or that we see in The Island of Dr. Moreau, here we have a mad scientist who's not experimenting on some other creature that he's created on his own, but he's experimenting on himself. That seems really important to your work. And
many scientists have done that, actually. Many scientists have done that. Even recently, the scientist who felt that many ulcers are caused by bacteria which was something that no one had ever considered possible, infected himself with the Heliobacter bacterium in order to prove that it would produce an ulcer, and it did, but he had to do it to himself to prove it. So even now, you might find yourself in a position where, as a scientist, you have to risk your own life in order to prove a theory that you believe firmly in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, my sense is that there's myriad ways in which perhaps you identify with Seth Brundle, but is one of those ways, I mean, because I think compared to the average filmmaker, you've had more interest in science, you know, as a child and even in your films than the average filmmaker.
Yeah, well, I thought I would be a scientist. I was always interested in the sciences, and I thought I could be a scientist writer like Isaac Asimov, who was an American-Russian scientist who also wrote I, Robot and other science fiction novels, and I thought that I'm Fahrenheit 451, and I thought I could be somebody like that. But then when I studied science at the University of Toronto, I realized that my temperament was perhaps not right for science. I think you have to have a lot of patience. You have to spend many, many years doing very boring, repetitive research projects and experiments before you come up with something. And I thought it would be better if I just invented my own science. And so that happened, for example, in my film Rabid. I really basically invented stem cell research. Of course, I had no proof that it was real, but I thought my understanding of the way the human body works, and in fact any animal body works, is that there is a basic cell that can transform into any other kind of cell. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of what the plot of Rabid is, for example. Mm-hmm. And in Videodrome, of course, I have really interactive television, which people feel was kind of a precursor to the idea of the internet and so on. So it was nice to invent my own science, even though I will not win the Nobel Prize for Science, and it's a big disappointment for me. But there you go.
The world is unfair.
It is unfair.
But even if I think about, for example, if I understand correctly, the way that Seth Brundle dresses in the film is actually something that you took from your own life at the time. You also wore identical outfits?
It's actually not.
Is that a myth?
It's taken from Einstein.
Huh.
Einstein had a closet full of exactly the same clothes, so that he didn't have to use any of his massive brain power deciding how to dress. So he did just have the same suit, exactly the same, clean, dirty, clean, and would not have to think about, today's Wednesday, so that's the hanger for Wednesday.
Yeah.
So it wasn't me personally, but it was, in fact, was a famous scientist who used that to kind of organize his life without wasting any time on what he felt was a superfluous kind of mundane daily thing that you have to worry about. I'm sure he figured out some amazing way to brush his teeth each day too, but I don't know about that.
I think I must have just seen, a couple of interviews with you in the 80s wearing the same jacket, perhaps, but I won't hold that against you. You did a lot of interviews. It's okay. But I think, for example, of one line in particular, there's a moment where Seth says, most people would give anything to be turned into something else. And I feel like that line gets very close to the heart of this character and what differentiates him from other stories of mad scientists where, the hubris gets out of control very quickly. I feel like he's actually trying to identify, I feel like you identify with him and he identifies with some sort of a core need in people that is not usually articulated in science fiction films.
That's a really great line. Did I write that line?
I think so.
Because I haven't seen this movie in 30 years, so I kind of forget a lot of my... That sounds good. Yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I think people come to a point in their lives where they feel there's some potential in themselves that they haven't realized, or that they actually hate where they are in their lives, or even if they're celebrity worshipers, they wish in some way that they could also be a celebrity or be that celebrity, be somebody else. Mm-hmm. So I think it's... and then there's always, of course, the anticipation of aging and death, and you know that you're going to transform. I mean, everybody does transform. You know in yourself that you were something different 10 years ago. And you know when you were a child, you were a different creature, physically, hugely different from what you are now. And even in your 20s, 30s, 40s, where you maybe stay more or less static, you know that you're going to change, you're going to transform. And of course, it's inevitable now, especially with the internet and so on. You are haunted by photos of yourself, with videos of yourself. Everybody's, on YouTube. You can see yourself aging. It used to be only movie stars who would see themselves aging on a screen, but now it's everybody. So you know that you will change. And part of you wants to control that change and be somehow able to make it be a positive thing rather than a negative thing.
Well, you recently wrote a preface to a new translation of Kafka's Metamorphosis. And in that preface, you actually talk a bit about your perspective on that kind of a transformation story, being a man in your 70s now. And the last time I watched The Fly, I thought about that a lot, I know you haven't seen the film in a long time, but I'm sure you remember it pretty well. And I guess I feel like, does this story resonate with you differently now as a man in his 70s than a man in his 40s when you made it?
No, I think I really had, I have more understanding of what it is to be 72 years old because I am, and I wasn't before. And I find myself rather surprised. 72 is ridiculous. That's old. That's almost dead, basically. And yet I'm not, so it's kind of confusing. So when I was 40, I was not 70, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, to me, one of the really interesting things about this character is the fact that, in other versions of Langeland's The Fly, the protagonist loses his ability to speak relatively early in the story. And I know that you insisted that Brundle keep his voice nimble as long as possible to be able to articulate what was happening to him until the very end. You're a very visual director. But I sense that once your protagonist can no longer speak, then we know things are kind of drawing to a close, right? Am I correct? It was important for you that he was able to describe his experience?
To me, dialogue is of the essence of cinema, and it's not what most people think. Most people would say that dialogue is perhaps the essence of theater. But for me, when you can't speak, you don't have cinema. It doesn't mean that that's not a hugely strong visual element, but when you can't speak, you lose a certain level of intellect and of intellectual discourse. And so I would feel bereft, I feel that all my powers as a filmmaker were taken away from me if my characters had to be silent. For example, my last couple of movies, Maps to the Stars, Cosmopolis, A Dangerous Method, they're wall-to-wall dialogue. There's almost never a moment where people aren't speaking. And in a way, that's the novelistic aspect of movie making, because it's words, it's words. And that is, even though the visual aspects of a movie like The Fly are hugely important and often are the things that people remember, but they do remember some of the lines of dialogue too. And the two kind of coalesce and create something that you wouldn't get just visually or just with words. So it was important for me to find a way to be convincingly, to have the character convincingly still be able to articulate what he's feeling. Even though we had to fit Jeff with all kinds of prosthetics in his mouth, and he had to take speech therapy to learn how to speak with this special jaw and so on. But I needed him to speak.
Yeah, it occurs to me it is something fairly rare in your films. With working with Viggo Mortensen in History of Violence and Eastern Promises, you do have some key sequences there where he doesn't talk, most notably a naked knife fight, and also the violent sequence toward the end of History of Violence. But I think perhaps those are exceptions because so much of the discourse you're talking about is so implicit in those sequences, is so implicit in those actions and in that physicality.
I mean,
and maybe that actor.
Yeah, no, I can double back on. I mean, it's often things that are unsaid are the most powerful things that are said. You know, those are the most powerful words, are the things that the words that you don't speak. And then if the audience understands that, then in a way you can have your cake and eat it too, your visual cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Viggo is very, very expressive naked with a knife.
Yeah. I want to talk to you too about, I mean, I feel like The Fly is at least three things. I mean, obviously it's a science fiction, and I think, I mean, whenever an intelligent director makes a genre film, people like to say that you're subverting the genre. I don't know that you're actually subverting it. I think you're actually just really adhering to it like very strongly, like you're making a real science fiction film.
Yeah, well, I think I'm realizing it. I mean, realizing the potential. Science fiction can be, like any other genre, it can be brilliant and wonderful, or it can be really dumb and obvious, you know, and just play by the rules. So what I'm trying to subvert is my audience,
Right.
not the genre, not the film. Yeah.
And of course, we talked a little bit about how the film, I think, is also a meditation on aging and death, and what it means to be human, what it means to inhabit a human body. But I think, I wonder if people agree, that I think one of the most underappreciated aspects of this film is also the love story. I mean, I actually think it's a really complicated love story, right down to this final act of euthanasia. And I don't know if that's something that you sort of felt obligated to work into the story? Or if it was
No, on the
important to you from
contrary. I mean, both the short story and the original screenplay had the couple married for a long time, and their relationship was really pretty normalized and very static, and didn't have any ripples in it except for this one monstrous moment. And I said, you know, I really want to see them meet each other. I want to see them meet each other and strike sparks off each other and have difficulties and have jealousy. And so, no, it was not at all perfunctory. It was of the essence that it was a love story that the audience was involved in right from the beginning of the meeting of those two people. And that wasn't in the original script, and it wasn't in the old movie, and it wasn't in Lang Lang's story.
Well, and it also really allows you to trace Seth Brundle's transformation in a different way, because we see him as this brilliant but sort of nerdy guy, and then suddenly, you know, once he gets into the teleportation machine, he also has this kind of sexual awakening and emboldening, and it changes the nature of their relationship as well. It kind of helps him win the love triangle.
Yeah, it's sort of like you know, internet sex, really. Now it's kind of a precursor to that, you know.
How so is it?
Well, you know, if each of you was in a telepod, I don't want to get into it. It's okay. Let's not talk about that.
Well, I mean, the other reason I'm harping about this is because lately when I rewatch your films, I actually think that a lot of your films deal not just with romance, but also with the complexities of long-term relationships. I think that the marriage and history of violence is very rich with nuance. Obviously, the relationship or the broken relationship in The Brood feels like it's imbued with a lot of very personal material. But yeah, it's one of these things, you know, we get, after all these years, we get caught up talking about certain themes in your work, mostly to do with the body, mostly to do with sort of existential terror. But I'm starting to think that you are, you know, intermittently a very adept teller of love stories.
I'm a romantic, definitely, as you can tell from this movie.
But it's true. Right?
Yes, because basically, you know, I mean, you know, as an artist, you are exploring the human condition. What is it to be a human being? And you are not doing that in an abstract way. You cannot film an abstract concept. You have to film a concrete thing, whether it's a human being or somebody or an object, and light has to fall on it. Light without something to fall on is not light. So you therefore, the human condition is an abstract idea, to make it concrete so that light can fall on it, you have to put it in a very definite context. North America, in this case, the city of Toronto, my city, people, it is a movie of its time. I just have to tell you one slightly funny story that has something to do with this. It did amuse me. Some young filmmakers, some young students, I think, saw my movie Shivers, which was a movie made in 1975, which was a groundbreaking horror film that had a lot of influence and repercussions and was kind of ripped off for the movie Alien, for example. And not that I would ever say that, but it did have a parasite that burns its way out of your body and jumps onto your face and goes down into your body and reproduces, but not, Alien, it was an accident that they came up with the same thing 2 years later. Anyway, these kids were watching my movie and they said, "You really nailed the 70s in that movie." And I said, it was the 70s, I mean, and now it seems like I recreated the 70s and really got the essence of it. And of course, therefore, you are not making a film in a vacuum. You're making it within your own context, and then you're making it within the context of the time that the film is set in. And so, scientists do have love affairs, and so on and so on. So to me, it all is of a piece, I mean, you can make a movie about a mad scientist alone in a room, but how interesting can that be? It could be perhaps interesting, but it's much more interesting if he has a partner in his life and so on.
Yeah. Well, and also, just as a side note with regards to Shivers, it occurs to me, too, that, we just recently, I don't know if it was Venice, certainly in Toronto, we had the world premiere of this Ben Wheatley adaptation of J.G. Ballard's High Rise. You have, of course, adapted Ballard's Crash. I always thought of Shivers, actually, as the first adaptation of High Rise.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy Thomas produced High Rise, and he did ask me if I would direct it. And as much as I love Ballard, I said, I think I've done it already. Shivers takes place in a high-rise, completely in a high-rise. It's called Starliner Towers, which might suggest a spaceship, which might suggest alien, but never mind. And so I felt and it wasn't influenced by Ballard because I hadn't read Ballard at that point. Oh, really? No, I hadn't. In fact, Crash was the first thing I read of Ballard.
Interesting.
And it was only when Jeremy proposed it to me, so it was late that I came to appreciate Ballard.
Kindred spirits, I guess.
Yeah.
Because he did really appreciate your adaptation of Crash.
He was lovely. We were at the Cannes Film Festival together, and he was very supportive of the movie. We had one lovely moment when, actually, I think it was a Finnish journalist stood up and said, and we're sitting there, we have all the cast from the movie and Ballard, who wrote the novel, sitting next to me, and the journalist said, "You have destroyed this book. You have betrayed the book. You have tortured the book. You've twisted the book." And Ballard said, "I actually think the movie is better than my book." The guy sat down, I mean, he was being very kind, but he did love it, though. He did love the movie.
Yeah, well, I guess the challenge of any of those projects is just the fact that his novels don't really have much of an arc to them. I'm a huge fan of them, but they don't have an arc that easily translates.
There's a tone that is there at the beginning, and it continues, yeah.
Well, let's talk, just to get back to this idea of why the love story seems to work. I'd love to talk to you about the casting of Jeff Goldblum. He has this toothy, lanky charisma and dry humor and sort of showmanship. He's an intelligent man of action. He's a geek with sex appeal. I like the way he says cheeseburger a lot. It is there are several moments in your career where I feel like you found a guy who seems to be the quintessential Cronenberg actor. But he's pretty unique. What got you to him?
Casting, as I've said many times, is a black art. It's a very complex, strange thing to find the right actor for your movie. Because not only do you have to have the obvious things, it should be the right sex. If it's a man, it should be a man, a woman, whatever. The right age, the right accent, the right talent for the role. But you also have to think about whether the actor has the star power to support the budget that you have, you know? I mean, The Fly was actually an inexpensive movie, and Jeff was not a huge star at the time. But
yeah, what had he done?
But he was enough of a star for that budget. And then when you do independent films, you have to think about the passport of the actor. Yeah. Because if it's a co-production between Canada and Germany, then the actors have to be from Canada or Germany or the European Union, and you can't have Americans in the movie. So these are things that an audience doesn't need to know. But the reason that that actor is in that role is often a very complex one. And it's very easy to end up with the wrong actor, and that, of course, it will kill your movie, you know. And then you have to have the actors all feel like they belong in the same movie. You know, you might have a very good actor, but he feels or she feels like she's not in the same movie as everybody else. So it's very subtle and very tricky. And then, of course, the actor has to want to do the movie. And we offered this movie to quite a few actors whose names you would know, and they were all afraid of the rubber. What does that mean? They were afraid of all the stuff that was going to be stuck on their face and their body, and felt that they could not act through the rubber, you know, through all the makeup effects. They felt that they would lose their magic as an actor. And only Jeff was enthusiastic about that. He loved the idea of acting through the rubber, with the rubber, you know. And you need an actor who's not afraid, whether it's, you know, Dead Ringers, where I actually went to 30 of the most famous actors you've ever heard of, and they all would not play twin gynecologists. They would play twin lawyers, but not twin gynecologists. They were afraid of gynecology, and they were afraid of twins. And only Jeremy Irons was not afraid, you know? And it took me a long time to find the right actor for that movie, 10 years actually. So with Jeff, it didn't take 10 years, but it took a while to find the right actor who fit all those criteria.
And is it important to you to connect with a lead actor just as a person? I mean, did you spend time with him? Did you feel like this is a guy that's going to understand the tone of this film? Sure.
My voice is kind of going.
Yeah, because I just think that he has such a unique quality, you know, and he's very physical, but he can also come across as very cerebral and charming.
Well, sometimes you have to be lucky, and you have to sometimes have the right people say no. You know, people that for some reason you thought, or your producer thought, or this, you know, if you had a studio, in this case, thought that somebody would be a good idea, and they say no, and you realize after the fact that it was such a good thing that they said no, because they would have been the wrong person. I've been talking too much, I think. But you don't have to love the actor, and the actor doesn't have to love you as a director, but you do have to have a chemistry and a rapport. And it helps if you do like the actor. It just makes things easier on the set and so on. Yeah. And Jeff was really funny, very eccentric, and extremely talented. And he would play the piano and sing that piano that's in the studio in between shots, you know. And actually, he would sing with Gina Davis because she was his girlfriend at the time, and they would sing duets beautifully together, you know. So it was all of that makes for a very magical kind of film set, which really does help.
Yeah, when you say you don't have to love the actor, I was thinking it sure helps though when the actors are in love with each other, I guess.
No, it doesn't actually. It's a big mistake usually. It can be really a bad thing. Huh. And my producers and I really thought twice about it. We were looking for the right match for Jeff, and this is all a crucial thing. They're supposed to be in love, they're supposed to be physically attracted to each other and attractive to the audience together. And Gina had just done something that got attention, so she had...
Earth Girls Are Easy?
Yes, right. Yes. And,
with Jeff Goldblum?
Yes. Yeah. But it was also something else she had done. Oh, she had been on a TV show. You'll figure it out. Google it. So she had some credibility as an actress, and And I auditioned her, and I thought she was terrific. And everybody said, yeah, but like, what if they break up in the middle of the movie? And then they don't want to talk to each other, and there's tension on the set. And, you know, that's all a legitimate possibility. But they were so obviously perfect for each other in this movie, you know, they're both tall.
They're both tall.
You know, like Jeff is about 6'5", and Gina's 6'1". You know, if I had a really small girl and Jeff, it would look ludicrous. Visually, that's a problem that you might not think of, but it means you're limited in the way you can shoot them. You know, so they were perfect physically and every other way, but there was that concern, and the fact that they were in love with each other could have been a problem, because there are times when they're not supposed to be in love with each other, and they're supposed to be very unhappy with each other.
But that's a part of what makes her performance so interesting too, right? Is I feel like she brings so much to the film, because she can really alternate between being in love and repulsed, and being protective of him and being very protective of herself. Like her response to the possibility that she's impregnated by him, I find really affecting, and that's something that I don't know that any actress would have been able to give.
Yeah, well, once again, you have to be, as an actor, you have to be unafraid of what you're doing. You know, you have to be unafraid of what the character demands. I recently, just with my movie Maps to the Stars, several actresses were approached to play the lead role of this really, you know, intensely vulgar, powerful actress in decline. And there were many scenes that actresses were afraid of. They were just afraid to play that scene. There's a scene where she's sitting on the toilet and she's farting and she's talking, and actresses were horrified. They said, there's no way I can do that. And Julianne Moore had no problem with it. It wasn't even a question of discussing it. You know, it was just, that's the character, that's the scene, we just do it. And she did it brilliantly. But you have to find that actor.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit about how you work with actors? Because you know, the actors need to strike such a particular balance in your films. There's a certain degree of naturalism, but there's also, of course, often very extraordinary events. You know, they have to convincingly be people that fall in love or go to the washroom and get dressed every day, but they also have to change into an insect. And I wonder, do you look for actors that don't need a lot of instruction, or do you find that you're comfortable having a lot of dialogue?
It really depends. I don't rehearse. I really don't know how the actors are going to say the lines of dialogue until we sort of block the scene on the day that we're going to shoot. And I like actors who can respond to that and don't need a lot of rehearsal, which I find to be kind of deadening. I don't enjoy it, and I don't think it works very well for movies. But not all directors work that way. Some directors like to have weeks and weeks of rehearsal. And I think when you're actually shooting the movie, everything changes, and all the stuff that you did in the rehearsal disappears. I know that Mike Lee does tons of rehearsals, so it depends on the kind of actors they are, whether they're from theater or not. I might have to stop.
Well, I mean, you mentioned working with Julianne Moore, of course, on Maps to the Stars. And I remember last year speaking with you a bit about working with her and how she. You okay?
Keep going.
She. I was thinking about the fact that so much of the film is shot in just singles. You know, just a lot of shots of, even in a group scene, many of the shots in Maps to the Stars are just of one of the characters at a time. Yes. And you had mentioned that Julianne Moore picked up on that immediately and said that she knew how to do the whole character based on that, which fascinates me.
Yeah. Ray Fiennes told me when we were doing. It's gone. It's just gone. I can't.
Do you?
I knew this would happen one day. After talking about how important speaking is, I can't talk. Ray Fiennes told me on Spider that he got the least direction from anybody on that movie, and he's brilliant in the movie. And the reason is that he was directed, of course, but it was when we were preparing this close of this character who's a kind of a derelict schizophrenic in London, preparing his clothes and his hair and how mussy it was, and how unshaven he was and so on, and what accent he would use. And by the time he got on the set, he knew the character. And I didn't have to tell him what to do. I mean, he knew what to do. You know, these are brilliant actors that I've been working with, and they don't really need a lot of direction if they understand the character. Of course, I guide them, you know, if I think the tone is wrong or something like that. But mostly, they're so plugged in. But, you know, there's preparation, and they do prepare themselves. And they often surprise me. And if sometimes what they do is wrong, if the tone is wrong, then of course we talk about it. But it's so rare with these wonderful actors, they just plug right into it. And the other thing is, how good is the script? I mean, the script for Maps to the Stars, for example, written by Bruce Wagner, an LA novelist. The characters are right there in the dialogue. It's incredible dialogue. And those actors, and most of the characters are actors, and the actors really understood those characters completely because it was very close to their own lives. So it didn't really take a lot of direction from me.
Well, I see we're getting limited on time, and we might run out of your voice really soon. So perhaps we could take a few questions from the audience, if anyone has a question they'd like to ask David. Yeah? Oh, a mic is traveling somewhere else.
It's traveling a long way.
Ah, okay, it's coming to you.
Yes, I was wondering, in the beginning of the movie we see Jeff Goldblum experimenting with animals, transporting them in the machine. Weren't you afraid that the audience might be repelled by that character, lose sympathy for him, and by that the movie?
So the question is about the experiments done on animals in the film, and were you concerned that the audience might turn off really, really quickly just seeing what's happening to animals?
No. No, I mean,
you
and
are
it's
playing with
not
sympathies.
really a political, I know it becomes a political issue, although the movie was made in the 80s, and maybe it wasn't quite as intense of a political issue, although it has always been a kind of thing. But it is also a staple of scientific research, and it is today, you know, and it's done. So the movie is not taking a stance on that. It's obvious that some horrible things happen to the animals that are experimented on, including the humans. And there was a scene, there's a famous non-scene scene called the cat-monkey scene. And it's a scene in which a cat and a monkey are blended together in this hideous kind of creature, and is killed by the Fly character once Jeff is transformed. And it was so disturbing, and a part of it was that he kills this creature violently, that we took it out of the movie, even though in terms of special effects and power, it was really pretty good, but it really deranged the movie. And I really did think that at that point, we would lose sympathy for Jeff the monster, the sympathy that was hard enough to create anyway. And so, although it's not exactly addressing what you're saying, it was part of the issue, is that these animals had been hideously murdered, basically, as part of this scientific experiment. So it was an element in what we were doing.
And it's also pre-CG, so people are thinking less. They're not assuming everything is just made in a computer.
Yes, there was no CG at that time, no. So this was all done physically on the set, yeah.
So if we could get a mic over here, we had a question, the burgundy leather jacket here in the center row. Or if you...
Okay.
Right. The torch is being passed. It's on its way. Got a big reach. Getting there. The tension mounts. Okay, finally, there you go.
Hello. I'd like to ask, because so many people have asked you if you watch your own films. and you've always said no. What other media do you enjoy? Not just what films do you like, just also music and all that, because I think that often influences artists and, you know, everyone to, you know, into what they do, what they like themselves.
I tend not to watch my own films. It's very hard for me to see a movie as a movie that I've made because I remember what was happening in each scene and who was there and the people that I worked with and the crew and what the temper on the set was, what the tone was. And so in some ways they're like documentaries of what I did that day. And it's very hard for me. I'm waiting. I know that eventually I'll become senile, maybe Alzheimer's, you never know. And I'll forget that I made this movie, and I'll be able to see it, and I'll say, this movie is great. Who did it? He must be a genius.
Who wrote that line?
So I tend not to watch my movies, and sometimes I have to watch them to do commentaries, you know, for DVDs, but I don't do that much anymore. And usually these days you do that very soon after you've made the movie, so it's still fresh in your mind what happened. Anyway.
But the question was about what media you do enjoy, what maybe inspires you, I guess?
Nothing inspires me. And I'm completely uninspired. I read the newspaper, then I get depressed like everybody else, you know. I went through a period of time when I was a musician myself. I played classical guitar. My mother was a professional pianist. She played with choirs and ballet dancers and so on. But I don't, I've kind of lost my connection with music somehow. And I don't really listen to music a lot. I have no idea why. In fact, I end up listening to it when Howard Shore has written the score for a movie. And sometimes I connect that way. For example, well, I won't get into examples, but for many of the movies. So I can't really answer the question any more directly than that, sorry.
Well, here's a weird piece of trivia then. I think it's a Canadian filmmaker thing. Adam McGoyan actually went to the University of Toronto to study classical guitar. So, did he? Yeah. You guys have that in common.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
That's what he studied. Another question? There's, let's do this one way in the back. The lady in the third row, fourth row from the back. We can do the relay one more time. It's coming. Got it.
Was that you in the delivery room when she was having the baby in the dream?
It was me in the delivery room.
Okay, cool.
Now, I have to tell you, it wasn't because I wanted to do that, and it wasn't because I like to do a Hitchcockian cameo in my movies, because I really don't. I don't do that. But at the moment, the person I cast to be the doctor who would deliver the baby, Gina said, I hate him. I don't want him there down between my legs. You have to do it. Now, on the one hand, I took that as a compliment, because when a beautiful woman says that to a man, it's okay. But on the other hand, it's kind of awkward because I would have rather be watching the scene and shaping it and so on. But anyway, I did it for Gina.
You're also a floor director in Deadzone, if I remember that correctly? You're a floor director in the Deadzone. Aren't you in the camera crew at the Prince conference in the Deadzone? Am I remembering that totally wrong?
I think you got that wrong.
Someone who looks like you? I don't know. You had different hair back then.
I don't think I did that.
All right, maybe I'm going see now.
Yeah.
We have time for, I think, maybe two more questions. Down in near front, white sweater. Here comes the mic.
Actually, I don't have any questions, but you're my favorite director, and I'm just really glad I got a chance to see you here. And I've loved your movies for a long time. I saw this one in the movie theater, 30 years ago when it first came out. And what really struck me about that movie and most of your movies, how you can make people empathize with the monsters or all the flawed characters. And That's what I admire most about your movies. And you know what? The chunks. I love the chunks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Another question? Somewhere, let's, oh, it's getting passed somewhere. It's coming to somebody. There we go.
Hi. So I had a bit of a technical question about the star of the movie we just saw, The Fly. The Fly itself, before it merged with Jeff Goldblum, there were a couple of scenes, the one where the monkey was batting a fly, the scene where the fly flies into the telepod, and later when Jeff Goldblum catches it with his hand. I was interested in knowing how did you do that? Was that a special effect, or did you actually catch some flies?
Well, we didn't have CG because the way you would do it now is you would just create it on the computer and it would be very simple. We had flies that we attached little threads to, translucent threads like fishing line, very light fishing line, and we moved them around with like fishing rods. Yeah, so they were, you know, they were extras in the movie. They got paid, but they were real flies, and it took a long time to get them to fly in the right place because flies are very hard to reason with. You know?
Until you merge them with a human being.
Yes, and then they're really unreasonable.
I think we have time for one more. Let's go up to the top somewhere. I see someone in the 5th row from the bottom.
Yes, I have a question about one of your other movies, The Deadzone, one of the better Stephen King adaptations, actually. How was it like working with Christopher Walken?
Well, this is one of those "how is it like to work with" questions, because you could say that about many of the actors and actresses that I worked with, because they're all very charismatic and really interesting and have done interesting work. It was great working with Chris. He's very funny. We, you know, at the time that we were working together, he hadn't done comedies. Now he does, of course. He's known for doing many comedies and musicals and so on. But at the time, he was considered this very intense, you know, really kind of, you know, almost surly, maybe hostile actor and so on. But he wasn't. He was just completely delightful to work with, and we laughed a lot. We had a lot of fun. He has a very a strange sense of humor, which I also have. So we got along very well, and he was a total professional, lovely guy. I mean, I can't say more. I don't have any bad stories about him. He was terrific.
Does anyone have a short question, a quick one? We do this on the end over here. We got a hand on the very end. I don't know where the microphone is right now.
I had my hand up too, though. Yeah, no, somebody handed me the mic. Blue hair.
All right.
I'm from Canada, and I know Toronto really well, so I was just wondering what cheeseburger place was that?
This is the question everyone has been waiting for the answer for. What cheeseburger place?
I don't remember.
That's not such a bad way to end our
it's in a very honest way.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for staying behind, and thank you so much, David, for talking with us about.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad my voice came back a bit.
Yes, I'm glad you hung in there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.